The first ever 12-team playoff rankings are here. Oregon is number 1, which is a good omen, and who cares, right?
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Gary Bryant Jr. could very well be back this week and maybe even returning punts. Talk about Jurrion Dickey a bit. Keep getting questions about him. And Ducks versus them, it just rocks. I don't know how else to say it. It rocks. Oregon is number 1 in the college football playoff rankings, which, if you want my full thoughts on those, go check out today's episode of Locked On College Football. I have many thoughts. I think it's ridiculous that Indiana's number 8. Completely ridiculous. Completely absurd. It's not absurd that Oregon's number 1. They've got what is now a top 2 win in the eyes of the playoff committee over Ohio State, as the Buckeyes are number 2. They've won the rest of their games. The Idaho game is a distant memory because Oregon's steamrolling everyone. I think they will do that again to Maryland this weekend at Autzen Stadium. Terps have got a pretty solid offense. At least that's what the numbers have said so far. If you got questions about them, by all means, let me know. I'll have a crossover with Locked On Maryland tomorrow on the show. But I think for Oregon, the question comes up, who cares? Why? Because Dan Lanning said at a press conference when they got to number 1 in the AP polls. And I'm sure if he was asked about the college football playoff first edition rankings, he'd say, who cares? Who cares? So I care a little bit. I care a little bit. Not so much about these rankings specifically, but about the idea of Oregon grabbing the number 1 seed in the 12-team playoff. Now, there are a couple of different calculations that you can look at, and we see this in the NFL playoffs, which is what this structure very closely resembles, much to my chagrin, but that's okay. It could have been... Anyway, not going down that particular rabbit hole today because people get too upset about it, but that's all right. We'll save it for another show. Oregon getting the number 1 seed or just getting any sort of bye does have inherent value. Now, there is also a caveat to that. When you're the number 1 overall seed, there's a target on your back. The good news for Oregon, Dan Lanning has brought this up, or at least from what we've seen on Ducks versus them, it's reasonable to infer he's brought it up other times as well throughout the last couple of weeks. When you assume that position of being the number 1 team in the country, you get that target on your back, but there's a different sort of pressure. There's a different sort of pressure. It feels different when you know, hey, everybody else thinks we're good enough to win the national championship. You can tune out the outside noise all you want, but this is a really, I think, underrated but difficult aspect of being a good head coach. How do you keep your team mission-oriented? And I think Dan Lanning has done an exceptional job of that, not just this season, but last year's as well. Remember, he's never lost, knock on wood, to an unranked team since being named Oregon's head coach ahead of the 2022 season. I don't see that changing this year. Now, that's first angle. Second angle is the playoff value, because if you're a top 4 seed, number 1, you have to be a conference champion. So if Oregon gets to the Big Ten championship game, which they absolutely should, they have to win it in order to get a bye in the first round. Then the question becomes, well, what's the value of that particular bye? You see teams that get byes in the NFL all the time. The Ravens have done it a couple times in recent years, but they're not the only team that's fallen victim to it. Sorry to my guy Richie Bradshaw, Locked On Sun Devils, who's a big Ravens fan, but it's just a team that popped in my mind. They've had byes and it doesn't go very well. Do you want to have that bye, or do you want to have played the week prior? You have that back and forth of, do you want to be rusty maybe for the first half quarter, or do you feel like if you have that extra week of rest, it's going to benefit your team? Well, for Oregon, it looks right now like having an extra week of rest in the playoff picture would be pretty beneficial. So yeah, who cares for this particular iteration of the rankings? It's a semi-historic moment that the rankings came out and Oregon's number 1. Last time Oregon, and here's the good omen that I mentioned, the last time that there was a new playoff structure, 2014, and Oregon was a part of the first of something. Now, this is just in initial rankings, of course, but Oregon was a part of the first ever 4-team playoff. They made the national championship. So if you're looking for a good omen, that's certainly one of them. Not the only indicator or the primary indicator that Oregon can win it all this year. But I know that some fans are superstitious like that. It's me. I I am superstitious and weird like that. But of course it matters not. But that particular question of how valuable is that first round bye to Oregon? How valuable is Tez Johnson to this offense? We're going to find out this week against Maryland. They've had some games this year where they've given up a hefty number of points. Their defense is nowhere on the same level as Michigan's. This is a team that lost to Michigan State, who Oregon, of course, long ago was able to beat pretty handily at Austin Stadium. I expect that to be the case again this week when the Terrapins come to town for a classic Big Ten matchup in which they're flying all the way across the country, which is something they also have working against them. Teams that are traveling 2 or more time zones this year, I don't think they have a great overall record. I don't think they have a great record against the spread. And Oregon covered last week. They had a slow start to the year against the spread, but they've started to pick it up. And you know what they say, good teams win. Great teams cover. Oregon covered last week. That makes them a great football team by default. But we will get a glimpse this weekend of how valuable Tez Johnson is or how needed he is for the Oregon offense. I think we got a pretty darn good glimpse of it last week. And Dillon Gabriel, I think this is the most crucial stretch of Dillon Gabriel's tenure as Oregon's quarterback to date. You lose your leading receiver. And I talked earlier this week on the show, I feel really good about the replacement options. I think you'll see more Evan Stewart, a lot more Evan Stewart, and about the same Justice Lowe from the last couple of weeks, and Treshaun Holden, and Holden could see a little bit of a bump as well, and you'll see him continue to use the tight ends, Terrence Ferguson and Patrick Herbert and Kenyon Sadiq, all of whom have caught passes this year in Oregon's offense, and I think have done a really good job. You're going to see that, but for a multi-week stretch, if the passing game's going to stay at the same level, then Gabriel has to continue performing at that same level. He's got to make the wide receivers better versions of themselves, rather than the receivers helping him out at times. I don't think that either one of those, groups or individuals has, carried the other. I don't think Gabriel's carried the receivers. I don't think the receivers have carried Dillon Gabriel per se. But when you lose a guy who's leading your team in receptions, receiving yards, and touchdowns, however capable the guys behind him are, it's going to be different. And so the ability for this offense to have success starts with Dillon Gabriel. It doesn't start with the offensive line. I know what the receivers can do, but it's the onus, I think, primarily is on Dillon Gabriel here to showcase, okay, Tez isn't here right now, but we can still make these plays. And every now and then, yeah, you'd love to see a 50-50 contested catch from Evan Stewart or lassoing that ball with his hand in the back of the end zone where I'm pretty sure he got 2 feet down. It was a crazy catch. There's a photo of it out there that was going around the internet that's really sick as well. But for Oregon going after that first round bye, I think there is some value in it. This offense is at its best when Tez Johnson is there. It can still be really good without Tez Johnson. But if you're telling me that Oregon's playing Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game or a playoff team in the quarterfinals that has a big-time defense or in the semifinals or whenever, I'd much rather have Tez Johnson on the field. And by the way, make of this whatever you will, but the analytics and the betting market don't think Oregon holds on to that number 1 spot. We shall see. ESPN gives Oregon a 22% chance to keep the number 1 overall seed, meaning they think there's a 22% chance that Oregon wins each of its next 4 games, because if they were to win all those 4, no one would be able to knock them off. FanDuel has got the Big Ten title odds dead even. Dead even. I think that's a slight overreaction and a sensing of what the public maybe feels about Ohio State. Like, oh, they're back. They went on the road. They beat Penn State. Really good win. Really good win. But remember, Ohio State got 7 points they shouldn't have. Oregon was sloppy in a number of areas. Ohio State didn't play perfectly, to be sure. That Big Ten title game right now, if it's Oregon, Ohio State, that feels like a toss-up to me right now. That's how I'd feel. How do you feel about it? Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on X, formerly known as Twitter. So Gary Bryant Jr. should probably be back this week, or at least that's what it looks like. He was at practice, full participant. He was returning punts. He wasn't the only full participant. More injury news, and it's trending well here for Oregon. Why isn't Jurrion Dickey playing? That is all coming up next. Guys, ever feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom? It's time you stop worrying about your performance and get Hims so you can feel confident knowing that you will be at your best when you need to. You can get personalized ED treatment without stepping a foot outside your door or a pinky or anything else. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Then, once you've got that all sorted out, go check out our friends over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. $150. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Do you want to bet on Oregon games? They've been kind of a wagon against the spread. Covered against Michigan. Covered against Illinois. Covered against Purdue. They've been on a heater. Do you want to bet it? FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Peach tea for tonight's second segment sip. I guess it'll be in the morning. Some of you are watching or listening to this at night. I don't care when you do listen to it because I appreciate you no matter what. If you ever want to submit a question, YouTube comments, X, formerly known as Twitter, DMs are wide open. If you want priority access and all sorts of other perks, go become a Locked On Ducks insider. Link in the description below. You can get a free 14-day trial. So, Gary Bryant Jr. back at practice, returning punts. That's a rather notable development here. After Ryan Pelham fumbled last week, I'm not giving up on Ryan Pelham's career. I do think that Gary Bryant Jr. should be ahead of him on the depth chart when it comes to returning punts. But interesting kind of dichotomy here. So Jurrion Dickey has not played this season, but for the Michigan State game in garbage time, Michigan State is when he had his lone reception of the season. Gary Bryant Jr. has not played yet this year. Now, he was a part of Oregon's receiving core last season. He was the clear number 4 guy. It was Troy Franklin, it was Tez Johnson, it was Trayshawn Holden, and then it was Gary Bryant Jr. And this is a guy who is around 6 feet tall. He can play inside, he can play outside, screen passes, gadget plays, fly sweeps, anything like that. He can do all different sorts of motions, really good yards after the catch. Not a big contested catch guy, but can play on the perimeter, can play in the slot. You can just do a lot with him on offense, and Will Stein did as much a year ago. The report, according to my guy Eric Scopel over at 24/7 Sports, is that he was back and he was returning punts this week. He was Oregon's kick returner a year ago, and I think having Tez returning punts is great. It's not where he got injured, and that can be a frustrating thing sometimes when fans see a player who's a starter go down on a special teams play. Like, why was he there on special teams? Well, there's a reason. But alas, that's not what happened here. And Gary Bryant Jr. goes back to return punts. I don't think this drastically improves Oregon's return game. I think Tez is obviously a loss in the wide receiver room. He's a loss to the punt return game too. He's had some pretty big returns outside. The Boise State game, he had a touchdown. He also had a big return that set up a touchdown to Evan Stewart. He had a nice punt return against Michigan as well. Like, he's done some good things there. So that aspect, not likely to be replicated with Gary Bryant Jr. back there, who was at one point in time, or I think for most of last season, one of Oregon's primary kick returners. Didn't do anything incredibly special. But with the way this offense is playing, even without Tez, priority number 1, just catch the ball, get it to the offense. Fair catch, it's good. I don't care if you have 5-10 yards of space. I trust these guys to move the ball down the field, especially against Maryland. Just don't do anything disastrous there. So I don't have high hopes in that sense. I do wonder about what Gary Bryant's role is in the wide receiver rotation. So talked about this earlier in the week, that I think Evan Stewart sees a bigger role, and then everyone else is mostly the same. Maybe Trayshawn holding a slight bump. If you want to throw Gary Bryant Jr. into the mix, I think this offense goes from being able to operate at 90% of what it was before to 95%. of what it was before. Because if you've got a guy who is as veteran and capable and productive as Gary Bryant Jr., who can line up in the slot, who can line up outside, I think the receiver combinations, like the defensive line, they get shuffled around a lot, just like they were a year ago. And you can put any of those guys on the field and feel confident in what they're able to do. I think that's absolutely a boon to the offense. So I'm here for Gary Bryant playing in his first game this weekend. Would be, I think, a really good opportunity to work him into the fold, because like I said, this is not a Maryland team that I expect to be able to challenge Oregon. They should be able to move the ball up and down the field. I think the defense is going to play very well. I was mildly disappointed, though not entirely, by how Oregon's defense played last week. Like, the fumbled punt led to 1 touchdown. I thought Michigan would have 2 scoring drives. They ended up with 3. 2 of those were touchdowns. Wasn't great, but Michigan made a couple of plays. Like the first touchdown, Davis Warren throws it. Brandon Johnson's blanketed over the guy. He has his back turned, and he makes a contested catch. Like, hat tip. That's just a hat tip play that you say, okay, guy made a heck of an effort there. But for this particular game, I think it's a great opportunity to get. Now, Gary Bryant Jr. is also a veteran, right? He played for multiple years at USC. He was with the Ducks last year, and like I said, the number 4 receiver. So he's not brand new like Justice Lowe working himself into the fold. But he hasn't played yet this year. He hasn't been in this receiving corps. He hasn't played with Dylan Gabriel yet in real game action. So I think him playing this week would be an absolute positive, but I've gotten several questions, probably about half a dozen or so this week, about, hey, why isn't Jurrion Dickey playing? Where is he? He was a really highly touted recruit. I think there are a couple things at play here. I don't think that he has no capability of having a productive Oregon career. Is he everything that Oregon fans maybe hyped him up in their minds to be? Clearly not. However, I think there are a couple things at play. Number one, was not healthy last year. Had an injury in high school that kind of carried over, I think, into fall camp. And they said coming into this year, yeah, he basically wasn't healthy last year. So he didn't really get a freshman season. He's a redshirt freshman right now. He didn't really have a freshman season. And when you look at Justice Lowe and how well he's playing, you have to remember, Justice Lowe has been with this team for several years. So he's got an extra year in the weight room on Jurrion Dickey, and he's got more time learning the playbook and the offense and being at practice and proving himself to the coaching staff than Jurrion does. For all we know. And by the way, Jurrion got dinged up in this year's spring game as well. So he hasn't had the opportunity to play for long stretches of time at practice and then take that into games in which he's been healthy. And I think he's still someone that's learning how to adapt to the college game. No matter what position you're at, there is an adjustment. Yeah, true freshmen can play at wide receiver. DeCorian Moore, he's probably going to play as a true freshman next year. He is that talented of a guy, but they're incredibly rare. Him and Ryan Williams, Cam Coleman, or Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State, it's really, really hard. And so most guys, even players that are really highly touted recruits at any position, generally need a year. And I don't think Jurrion really got that learning experience year a season ago. So that's the first thing, coupled with the injury. The second thing, are you looking at this wide receiver room? It's crazy talented. Heck, in the few snaps that we've seen Jeremiah McLaughlin play, what about him doesn't look really good? Like, I think it is legitimately just a function of something that I have said many times on this show dating back to the spring. This is the most talented 2-year stretch of Oregon wide receiver rooms I have seen in my lifetime. And there have been some good ones. Nothing like this. There's nothing like this. For all we know, Jurrion right now or Kyler Casper on the 2018 team that, really, really struggled with drops might have been the number one guy. Might have been the number one receiver. Like, we don't know because, you're comparing two different teams there, but this is just a crazy talented room. And Justice Lowe is a really experienced guy, and everybody raves about him. And no, he wasn't as big of a recruit as Jurrion Dickey, but the evidence is pretty clear that Justice Lowe is really good. So when you look at Justice Lowe and see he's really good, and you say, whoa, where's Jurrion Dickey? Is he not any good? No, he's just not as good as that guy over there. That doesn't mean he won't be good one day. He's just not good right now. For some guys, the acclimation process can take a little bit longer than it does for others. And Justice Lowe isn't someone who hit right away. He got recruited. I'm pretty sure. I'm going to double check this here just for the sake of accuracy. I'm pretty sure he was a class of 2022 recruit. Yeah, Justice Lowe. This is Justice Lowe's third year of college football. Third year. My understanding is he's been healthy for all three. So that's how long he's been going up against college DBs in practice in front of Dan Lanning and Junior Adams. That's how long he's been able to be in the weight room and be fully healthy the whole time, and Jurrion just hasn't. So I think that's why Lowe is ahead of Jurrion at the moment. It doesn't mean that Jurrion's career is never going to have the opportunity to take off to where he can reach his full potential. Depends on how healthy he is, but he's got to find a way to just establish himself at practice, because Justice Lowe has clearly done that. The wide receivers, you go back to comments of fall camp, they rave about Justice Lowe over and over and over again, and I think we're seeing why right now. I understand why people ask that particular question. You keep the questions coming, always, but I think that's what's going on. I want to mention Dave Iuli because he was a full participant at practice, and then Ducks versus that, it just rocks. It's just... Lanning's a maniac. It's so great. It's so great. That's coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by ZBiotics Pre-Alcohol, a probiotic drink that is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. We've all been there, of course, and here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember, make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. As I've said before, I have experience using this particular product, and it is phenomenally good. You will feel great during, you will feel great after, you will feel great the next day. Trifecta of feeling good. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your order when you use that code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout. They have a 100% money back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off. Then you go over to Game Time. Why? Because Game Time's just the best. That's why. They're filtering out the fluff with Game Time picks to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They are making it easier to see your favorite teams play live, and yes, that includes Oregon. Do you want a game? Do you want a ticket to the game this weekend? Game Time's going to have that and everything else. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you are looking for, and you get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, because they want you to know exactly what to expect. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE. That's LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Do you know what time it is? Yeah, it's Game Time. So I was reading an article from my guy Eric Scopel, 24/7 Sports, boots on the ground in Eugene at practice this week, and friend of the show, Eric's the man. He said that Dave Iuli is a full participant. Great sign. Great sign. There's another guy who's been in the program for the last couple of years who probably played more meaningful snaps than people realized a season ago, and is someone who could absolutely, barring a barrage of transfers on the interior of the offensive line, Dave Iuli could be a starting offensive lineman in 2025. There is an incredibly realistic world where that is the case. So this is someone who I absolutely would love to have available on the interior of that offensive line. What you want when you've got injury concerns with guys like Marcus Harper, we'll see if he ends up playing this week, you want to have options. You don't want to be pigeonholed into, hey, we have to go with this guy because there are no other options, or we can't put a true freshman in there. We don't feel like he's ready, but a battle for the starting right guard spot, if Harper were to be out this week between Kavika Rogers and Dave Iuli, I think that'd be a great thing. Or the ability during the game to either keep them fresh or say, hey, Kavika's not really feeling it right now. Let's put in Dave. Or we like this matchup better with, the play that we're trying to run here. Whatever it would be. I think that's a seriously notable development. Iuli, I don't believe has played at all this season. He's been working his way back from an injury, but getting that depth back would be a really, really good thing. And going back to my conversation earlier on today's show about the value of getting the number one bye, or the number one seed and a first round bye, these are the sorts of guys that you want to have at 100% as best you can. Tez Johnson at the top of that list, but don't overlook the big fellows. I certainly never do. And I never overlook Ducks versus them. If you haven't seen it yet, it's just, I wish it was as long as that team out west. I'd watch the whole thing. You can make it 90 minutes. I would watch the whole thing. Scott Anderson is the best hire Oregon football has ever made, aside from Dan Lanning. I mean, Chip Kelly would have to be very high on that list as well. And okay, all right, that was overstating things because we Bilotti and Rich Brooks, like a lot of great hires out there. But Scott Anderson is high on my list. The Oregon social team rocks. And I look forward to these recaps every week. So if you missed this week's, it's phenomenally good. I think it is the best one this season and my second favorite ever. My first favorite is Colorado last year. That one was great. This one is so cool. And I cannot stop listening to headset communication. When I hear it, when I'm watching Ducks versus them, I go back and rewind. I love listening to what these coaches are saying and how they are reacting in real time as the game is playing out in front of them. It's great. Dan Lanning tying the Gladiator movie with Russell Crowe into this week's game, and that he told the team on Monday, hey, you're going to have an opportunity. When the team, when we're up at the end of the game, the fans are going to be leaving the stadium, and I'm going to have you take it in. And then he has them taking it in, and they're just documenting the whole thing. This sort of access, this is not normal. This is not normal. I'm sure there are some other teams that do something like this. I know a lot of teams post some version of a cinematic recap. I don't know how many have the access and the behind the scenes looks that we get as Oregon fans. It's a really special thing. And shout out to the coaching staff for allowing the social team to do this, because it takes a lot of coordination to put these things out there. Because they have said, hey, we don't want you to put this out there. Like, don't have our verbiage or our code or our play calls or anything like that. You're like, it takes a level, like Dan Lanning has to want this stuff. He's not just, oh, okay, whatever. Like for this to happen, Dan Lanning has to be saying, yeah, I think this is great. Let's do it. Let's make sure you guys have access and can get everything you need. And they're just knocking it out of the park every single week. The whole Gladiator thing with the thumbs down, which ties into Jabbar Muhammad's box and the thumbs down, is phenomenal. It's just phenomenal across the board every single week. Like, my favorite part of Oregon games this year, number one, winning. Number two, Ducks versus them. Not even the reaction shows. My own reaction shows are tertiary on that list. And the secondary thing that I look forward to the most, I tell you, Ducks versus them. Scott Anderson, man, doing yeoman's work. The entire, and everybody involved whose name you don't know. Shout out to all of you out there, because I know there are a lot of people behind the scenes. There are a lot of people behind the scenes in athletic departments to make this stuff happen. And boy, do they deserve their flowers in a big way. Thanks for making this your first listen. Go make Locked On College Football your second. I keep you updated with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth 6 days a week this time of year, 5 days a week, and then reaction shows just like here on Locked On Ducks. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.